All right, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. And today, we're going to be looking into something pretty cool, actually. We're going to be talking to the F-35 and how it tries to hide itself from infrared sensors.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic for sure. You know, when you think about stealth, you usually think of radar invisibility, but infrared is a whole other ballgame.
Right, like every object emits heat, and that's exactly what those IR sensors pick up. So right off the bat, how does the F-35 even try to stay hidden in that, heat sensing world?
Well, the articles I've found dove pretty deep into this, and it turns out that the F-35 isn't really going for complete invisibility when it comes to infrared.
So it's not like a ghost just vanishing in thin air.
Not quite. It's more about making it much harder to detect, track, and ultimately target.
So making life really hard for the enemy, basically.
Exactly. It's about disrupting that so-called kill chain. Even delaying them for a few minutes can be the difference between success and failure in combat.
I see. So it's like playing hide and seek and finding that spot that isn't totally hidden, but it buys you enough time to make the seeker kind of lose interest.
That's a great analogy, actually. And the source goes on to highlight how the F-35's engine design is a prime example of this philosophy.
Yeah. I was looking at the visual comparison of the F-35 engine with the Su-57, the Russian jet. And it's striking how the F-35's engine is so deeply recessed.
Right. It's practically buried inside the aircraft with all sorts of shielding and cooling features to minimize its heat signature.
Whereas the Su-57's engine is a lot more exposed. I mean, it's just kind of hanging out there.
Yeah, and that's a trade-off you often see in aircraft design. A more exposed engine is simply to build and maintain, but it's also a much bigger infrared target.
So the F-35 sacrifices some ease of maintenance for a lower IR signature.
Exactly. It's a calculated decision based on the F-35's role as a stealth aircraft. They've gone to great lengths to manage that heat signature. The source even mentions these serpentine exhausts.
Serpentine exhausts, what are those?
They're these specially designed exhaust nozzles that are meant to rapidly cool the exhaust gases before they leave the aircraft.
Oh, wow. So it's like giving the exhaust a cold shower before it exits the plane.
Well, you could think of it that way, yeah. And the source also mentions special coatings on the F-35 skin that contribute to reducing its infrared signature.
Right. The RAM coatings, I've heard of those, but I thought those were mainly for absorbing radar waves.
They do that too. It's called radar absorbent material for a reason. But these RAM coatings also help to dissipate heat, which further reduces the IR signature.
So it's a 2-for-1 deal then. That's pretty impressive, and I imagine this technology is constantly evolving.
Oh, absolutely. It's a constant arms race. As stealth technologies improve, countermeasures also evolve. There's this constant push and pull between hiding and seeking.
Makes sense. But even with all this advanced tech, the source makes it clear that complete IR invisibility is basically impossible.
Yeah, and there's a pretty fundamental reason for that.
What's that?
Well, it boils down to physics. Any aircraft, no matter how stealthy, generates heat just by operating. You've got the engines, the friction of air on the aircraft skin, the electronics on all these things produce heat.
I see. So you can minimize it, but you can't really eliminate it completely, at least not with current tech.
Right. Minimizing it is already a huge engineering challenge, but completely erasing that heat signature is a whole other level of difficulty.
So even though it's not perfectly invisible, how effective is the F-35's stealth in actual combat scenarios? The source mentioned something called red flag exercises, I think.
Yes. Red Flag is a large-scale air combat exercise run by the U.S. Air Force. It's designed to be as realistic as possible, mimicking real-world combat.
So it's not just playing around in a simulator. It's as close to the real deal as you can get without actually being in combat.
Exactly. And according to the source, the F-35 has performed incredibly well in these red flag exercises, consistently dominating the competition.
Wow. So even if it's not invisible up close, it's still doing a fantastic job of staying hidden and outmaneuvering the enemy.
Precisely, the F-35 stealth, particularly its reduced IR signature, lets it operate in a way that most other aircraft simply can't. And this feeds into its strength in beyond visual range combat, or BVR.
BVR meaning engaging enemies before they even know the F-35 is there.
Exactly. It's about leveraging that element of surprise aided by stealth. That's what makes the F-35 so effective.
Fascinating stuff. So to recap, the F-35 uses a whole bunch of tech from special engine designs to those RAM coatings to shrink its infrared signature. And while perfect invisibility might be out of reach right now, it's still giving the F-35 a huge advantage on the battlefield, especially in those BVR engagements.
That's a great summary, and it really makes you think about where this technology is headed in the future. Will we ever see aircraft that are truly invisible in the infrared spectrum, or will there always be new detection methods popping up, making this a never-ending game of cat and mouse?
That's a great question, and I guess Only time will tell. Thanks so much for taking us on this deep dive today. It's been really eye-opening.
My pleasure. Always happy to talk about this stuff.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of military tech.
See you then.